With the Real Management Company, coming to you again with another weekly client call. It's good to see you all. Thanks for joining me. This week, we'll be talking about the requirements under AB 3088 for rent collection for past rent as well as rent moving forward. And then Denise will be on the call with us probably about 10 or 15 minutes from now. And so in the meantime, we'll start with Josh and his deal of the day. Josh has an update for us for one of our previous deals, which will be interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing. So why don't I put you on, Josh, and get you started. Go ahead. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. So there was a few weeks there that I stopped kind of paying attention to San Francisco multi-unit properties. It was because sellers were not adjusting prices according to the market. They were holding on to 2019 prices. So I was kind of skipping over deals for, felt like a solid month there or so. I found a couple, but I can officially say at this point, the environment has changed significantly. Properties that are coming out now are reflective of the market today. So prices are cheaper. There's a baby screaming, and so it's an interesting change of events. So I'm actually looking at San Francisco properties today. I was having this feeling that this. Hold on one sec. Sorry, give me a second here.
Okay, I'll take over for a minute.
Yeah, just for 1 sec.
So what I thought was interesting about this was I saw Josh was going to do this building, and it's a building in the neighborhood near my home and my office, and I noticed that scaffolding went up around it, and they rented the commercial space. This is at 17th and South Van Ness. It was I think it's a 5-unit building, a 6-unit building with a cafe on the ground floor and a vacant apartment upstairs. It looked okay. The pricing was a little bit high when we last talked about it, but it looked like a nice building. And then they apparently didn't sell it. And I think we must have talked about this back in June or July. They didn't sell it. They put up scaffolding. They painted the building. It looked like a Mexican restaurant got started there. And then here it is back on the market, and Josh is ready to take it back. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you were talking about this building kind of coming back to market. So I'm just seeing much better pricing. I had this feeling looking at properties today where I got excited for San Francisco, where I thought that the risk associated with buying buildings with a couple of vacant units, 1 or 2 vacant units, felt okay based on the price that sellers were asking. So I felt like the risk is now getting priced in a little better, and I'm seeing opportunities. So this building, I'll pull this building up. This is just a perfect example of, let's see, 1 sec here. Let me pull this building up.
Hello.
Did everybody see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So this building was quite ugly before. They put this nice paint job on it. It has dropped in price by $400,000, which is a huge drop. They renovated.
Where was it at before?
What's that?
Where was it at before, and where's it at now?
2.2.
Okay.
And now it's at 1.8.
Oh, that's yeah. Okay.
So they improved the facade. It's kind of how I wanted it to look when I first showed it, and I said this is kind of where you can go. The key features here: that commercial tenant extended their lease for 5 more years. They're paying $28.50, which is about $3 a square foot, which I think is a manageable amount for that tenant. So it feels pretty secure, and with the 5-year extension, more secure. They also renovated that vacant unit. So now it's, I'll show you some photos of it. So it's the things that I felt like needed to be done here have been done, and then the price also dropped. So it was appealing. It's much more appealing now. You'll see down here, it's coming out at a 6 cap, and in this market, I can say definitively, I'm not buying anything that's less than that is below a 5 cap. There's no reason to buy anything below a 5 cap right now, based on what I'm seeing. So last year around 3.5 caps, 4 caps, 2.5 caps, whatever it was. There's just no reason to buy anything less than a 5 cap. 6 cap is even better, obviously. So kind of move through here. Near 16th and Mission, nice location. Here's the commercial space.
And that's all built out now. That
all
looks
built
much better
out.
than it did before.
Right. Looks new. Looks nice. Again, $2,850 for this space, I think is manageable. Here's the renovation to the vacant unit. This was not done prior. So new floors, the nice box ceiling, new windows, new paint, large unit, 3-bedroom, 1 bath. The prior agent priced this unit at $5,500. It was either $5,000 or $5,500. Now they're coming in at $4,500 as market rents. I talked to JJ and we chatted about it. $4,500 is still probably a little aggressive, but $4,000 is reasonable, possibly. So Joel said, no dice, no way. $3,500, how about that? You give me that? All right, winner. So 3,500 is, $3,500 to 4,000 still is a very nice cash flow. It still puts me in the mid 5s or above. So I don't have a problem with that. And it's just a beautiful unit, just a different vibe. With that exterior and that interior, you're just in a much better space. So just kind of moving through here, just some of the features of it and the mission. Not on the soft story list. So it's 4 residential over commercial, which does not qualify for a mandatory retrofit. You'd agree with that, right, JJ? It's 4 units, 4 resi?
It's close. Yeah, it doesn't count, but it's close.
Right. Whether you want to do it, that's another conversation. Just another photo of it. So here's the rent roll that I was mentioning. So you do have that 1 vacant unit priced at $4,500. You do the best you could there. $3,500 or above is still a moneymaker. The rest of these rents are quite manageable in terms of what people are paying. So you're just, I'm happy walking into a 6 cap or a 5.5 cap with these rents. I don't feel like, if people are going to flee, I feel like these people are not going to go anywhere at these numbers. So again, the market has changed where you're looking for stability as opposed to turns. And so I feel like there's some nice stability built into this building and some nice upside with that renovated unit.
Well, it's interesting too, if you go back one slide there, they're actually accurately reflecting that 2,300, I don't know, 2,300 might be kind of a lot for a 376 square foot 1 bedroom.
Sure.
376 seems weird, but especially for a 1 bedroom, that's smaller than most studios.
Yeah.
But they're even saying their pro forma rent is lower than their current rent by $31.
Right. So they're saying they're over market, right?
Which is a little bit strange, but it works. And the rest of this other rent, I don't know how I'd be interested to see to actually visit, if I were looking at these units, to actually visit one of these units, this 3-bedroom unit at 918 square feet is a little small also. And the 4,500 is a little high, but I have some recent comps in the 3,500 to 4,000 range. So
Yeah.
it's not bad. It's just those numbers they're still hard to get. I wouldn't be necessarily banking on it today, but a couple of months maybe.
Right. And underwrite it conservatively at 3,500 would
Yeah.
be the right thing to do here. So the other thing I like about it, showing a down payment of 35%. So we're getting away from the 50% down payment requirements because these returns are so low. So you're seeing down payments start to go down. So less cash out of pocket. I like that. Price per unit at 360 is okay. Minus that one small unit is a little high. That gets spread out. You know, with that cap rate, walking into a 6 cap or a 5.5 cap with an upside up to an 8.5 cap, 9 cap. I mean, there's some nice upside built into it as well. 7.5% cash on cash return walking into, let's call it 6.5% even with that vacant unit. I think it's great. You didn't see this deal in 2019. It didn't exist. Again, these are just more numbers, the overall expenses, which are pretty standard, no big surprises here, but a nice, cash flow after debt service of $45,000 a year on $630,000 in, which is nice. It's a nice return to walk into day one, especially not having to do big improvements at the building. So you're not having to buy the building and throw a lot of cash at it to improve it, which is the way I showed it to you first.
Right. I prefer to see them put a bunch of cash and lower the price by $400.
Right. Exactly. So it's just, this is, reflective again of an improving market for buyers. Not great news for sellers. But I had the first feeling of thinking as an investor in San Francisco that a first kind of positive, warm and fuzzy feeling looking at the market today. So that's kind of my overall takeaway from kind of what I wanted to share with you folks.
Well, let's hope that Prop 21 is defeated at the ballot in November. So we got 4 weeks till Election Day. Right. And if that is the case, then I think a lot of people will have some warm and fuzzies about reinvesting in San Francisco because the agents, the leading apartment building agents that I see with their regular advertising and their mailing lists that I'm on with their listings, every listing that I see that has come out over the last 3 or 4 months is still available and is showing improved pricing, and I like the way that they're describing, improved metrics. Like, yeah, that means you lowered the price. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Totally. There's like 6 different ways to describe price gaps.
But that's what they're doing is they're putting a little more room in there. And then there was an almost completely vacant, like 15 unit building in the marina that's been, on the market for a while. And, I can't see a lot of people being real interested in completely vacant buildings these days. That's no,
that's too much.
That's I'm
okay with 1 or 2 vacants, but I'm also noticing some of the larger agents have just pulled buildings off the market completely.
Right.
So they're just, I think there's some people who are going to just sit this out,
right,
and bring them back out next year if things improve. But small building market too, triplex, fourplex market, same thing, challenging.
Yep, definitely. Well, thank you for that. Yeah. And your timing is excellent because now it looks like Denise is here. So I'm going to start the conversation and we will take it from here. Hold on one second here. So the conversation is really related to what comes next. Now it's October here in San Francisco and everywhere. But the effect of that in California is that we have a whole new set of rules. And John and I were discussing it this morning and trying to game out the situations where it actually would make sense to look at and be serving these notices. And I'm going to put a notice up on the screen here. Hold on one second. And let's do the California 401 form is the first one, and we'll also have the 410. And let's go back into here. There we go. Okay, share screen, the 401, share. Okay, so this is, can everybody see the form here?
Yep.
Yep, okay. So this is the form that we have to send to our tenants who have a deferred balance on their rent. And, or no, this one, we're looking at 401, right? Okay. My screen. Hold on.
Yeah, there's 401 on the top.
Okay, good. So that's the, man, this thing is crazy. Yes, that's the 401 form. Okay. So Denise, walk us through the requirements here, and let's talk a little bit about, does it even make sense to be serving this if you don't intend to sue your tenants in small claims court for an unpaid rent?
Well, first of all, this presumes that you have provided the form, what we call a Form 400, which is giving them
Right.
information about the whole process pursuant to AB 3088.
Right.
And then this also presumes that you are going to put by the wayside any sort of agreement that you've struck with them, because now that's presumably unlawful. That if they are on a payment plan, that's not pursuant to law. And so whatever you have agreed to, or whatever, if there's any sort of enforcement mechanism with any documentation, or if it's just what we call a proof in the pudding agreement, that's by the wayside. So if you made an agreement with them and they're supposed to be paying X amount of rent for this particular period of time, it's no longer any good, so to speak. So you have to redo it. So it's literally, are you going to file a lawsuit, or are you going to want to try to evict them, no matter what period of time you're talking about? The issue pertaining to whether it's pre-September 1st or not pertains to when the law took effect. So in my opinion, I think you should document everything, because you don't want to negate your possibility of proceeding, whether it's a breach of contract action or an unlawful detainer.
Okay. So,
however, we also have the overlay of Preston, as we know.
right.
So irrespective of the fact that in California law, pursuant to AB 3088, allows you to evict, presumably San Francisco, you will not be able to evict for non-payment. But we're going to assume that that's not going to be correct, because you want to be able to protect yourself under state law as well.
Right, right.
So it's an election by the landlord as to which avenue of approach.
Okay. So John and I were discussing an example this morning of a tenant that we have who had a deferred balance, and they're making progress toward paying it off. They've already made some payments. And does serving this notice for the past due rent that remains due and payable, does that cause us any trouble as far as the arrangements that we've already made that they were going to pay? Let's say they're going to pay it all off by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
3 more payments.
Mm-hmm.
If we serve this notice, does this negate our ability to continue to collect those funds from the tenant?
I would argue yes. I think you're abrogating the agreement. So then this is a situation where the owner needs to determine, okay, if they owe me $10,000, do I want to abrogate the agreement? If they owe me $2,000, do I want to terminate the previous agreement and go pursuant to law? The
Okay.
issue is that you're not going to be able to actually file a lawsuit for a breach of contract if you're not complying with the AB form, with the
Okay.
particular form that we're looking at.
Okay.
So that is a judgment call. That's sort of, well, am I going to bet the come, so to speak? Am I going to just see what happens? Or do I think this tenant is not going to pay me pursuant to the agreement that we've already struck?
Right. Right. Okay. So
And
we're
I'm
looking at-
assuming that you've given the tenant the notice.
Right.
So they know what their rights are.
Right.
So
Right. So that form, part of the reason why I had it was, that's a 9-page long form. And it includes a variety of different things. It includes a proof of service. It includes all kinds of other details. But the bottom line is that if you don't serve this form for the previous rent that was due at some point between March and August,
Right.
that you are no longer allowed to take any legal action to collect that money because you're not compliant with AB 3088.
Correct. You are not allowed to take an enforcement action, a breach of contract, or even potentially an unlawful detainer complaint.
Okay, in any way, shape, or form. So if you feel like John, explain your concern about this with regard to that specific circumstance?
Exactly. JJ, if I may interrupt you, that's the issue. Every single circumstance needs to be reviewed.
John, so what was your concern in that circumstance?
So I put our tenants with deferred rent into 3 buckets. The first bucket is people who have resumed paying their full rent plus are paying a portion of the deferred rent. The second bucket is people who have resumed paying their full rent but haven't touched a previous deferred balance. And the third bucket is tenants who are still deferring 100% of their rent and haven't done anything.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here for a second,
Yeah.
John. So bucket 2 and 3, you definitely want to comply with AB 3088 forms.
Okay, yeah, so the specific scenario that JJ just mentioned is in the first bucket. These tenants have resumed paying their full rent, and they've told us, they've given us an agreement that they're going to pay X dollars per month on top of their rent to pay off the balance, and they've been honoring that all along. So I don't want to send this notice, which takes a kind of a more aggressive stance that is not necessary. I don't think, because they're honoring the agreement.
Okay, and so the issue will be, what if they stop on November 1st?
Well, then we can serve the 401 notice then. I mean, there's no, unless the owner intends to sue them in small claims court, the notice, I don't think the notice is necessary now, because we can serve it next month, or we can serve it on February 1st or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the business decision for the owner.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
So Denise, do we lose anything by serving the notice at a later date?
Well, that will be up to the tenant to argue. But if you've provided the AB 308 Form 400 notice, i.e. giving them notice that the law took effect,
Right.
then they understand that they are protected. They could have that argument for protection. So what avenue is the owner going to do? Are they going to proceed in breach of contract, and how much money would that be?
Right.
So it's a business decision. If there's a significant amount of money, and I appreciate that the notice is onerous for the bucket 1 folks, but serve the notice.
Right.
Serve the notice as soon as you can if you have any inkling that they're not going to comply.
Right.
How much money could possibly be at stake? If
Right.
the owner is willing to forgive it and forego it and say, you know, I'm just so glad that they're just paying now. I'm willing to forgive it in the future if they're not going to honor the agreement and I can't enforce it because I did not provide the proper forms. That's a business decision.
Right. Right.
Conservatively, serve the notice. That's a conservative. But at the same time, you don't want to kick the sleeping dog if the dog is fine. So that's the business decision that we all have to make.
Well, I think in the circumstance that John's describing, which I think John, is this the only tenant that we have that's in bucket 1?
I think we have 2 or 3. I can't remember it's just a couple.
It's just a few. And in those circumstances, I think as long as we are in a position where they continue to pay, if they stop paying either current rent or their portion of the back rent as they agreed, we can then serve the notice and be ready to proceed with the prior rent.
Right. The current rent is not an issue. The current rent, we know we're going to serve a notice, but it's the pre-September 1.
March to
Exactly.
August rent.
Yeah.
It's that one specific set of months, the 6 months there, that is the problem. And So let's transition. That's an interesting conversation, and let's transition to the moving forward rent. So tenants in that first bucket are not going to be a problem for this question. The tenants who are paying their current rent and are making payments to pay off their back rent, which is only 2 or 3. We do have a number of tenants who are in the second and third buckets who are deferring all or part of their rent, even in September and now in October. And so those tenants get a Form 410, which I'm not sure that was necessarily all that helpful to have it up on the screen, but the Form 410 simply states that the tenant hasn't paid a portion of their rent and is claiming a COVID hardship, and that they are self-certifying that they do not make more than 130% of the average median income in San Francisco, or 108%, or whatever it is, 130%, which works out to be $130,000 a year in San Francisco, or $108,000 in Alameda or Contra Costa counties. So tell us a little bit more about the Form 410 and the process moving forward for October. Was it October or September through February?
September through February. Basically September through the end of January, because February, it's kind of
It's
normal.
supposed to go back to normal, except it probably will be changed, I would imagine.
Correct. That's what I'm expecting, that it will be extended. But so currently we're just going to deal with what we're calling the AB 3088 issue, which
Right.
is effective September 1st. So when we know that they're the bucket 2 and 3, as John has identified, we give the 15-day notice, and we have them, and they have 15 days. And I suggest a personal serve, and a personal serve is with a process server or somebody who has the ability to knock on the door and hand it to the tenant. If the tenant is not there, you post it. We call it a nail in mail, which is basically you post it on the front door of the premises and then you put it in the mail. Those 2 steps are still a good serve if you, a good immediate serve, personal service if you don't hit the person directly with the papers that you're serving. And that starts the 15-day clock. And during that 15 days, you're letting the tenant know that they owe money. Under California law, they're supposed to pay at least 25% of the base monthly rent. And they must certify within 15 days. I shouldn't say certify. In San Francisco County, they don't need to certify. Under California law, they need to certify that they are having financial difficulties because of COVID. And then you determine whether you want to proceed or not in the future in March. But they were supposed to pay at least 25%. If they don't pay at least 25%, you can evict. If they do pay 25%, you may not evict, but you can proceed to file a breach of contract action.
Okay, so, and let's clarify, the 25% of each month from September through January
Correct.
is due at the end of January, January 31st. So we're talking about 5 months, 125% of 1 month's rent is the amount of money due, and it is due at the end of January. So if you get 0 rent in September, or you got 0 rent in September, or you got 0 rent in October, you're serving the tenant the notice to remind them that they have to be ready for that payment. Otherwise, we're going to be allowed to move forward with an eviction action in February.
That's right.
That payment doesn't come in. So
And
it's
the
us
reality
waiting
is
too.
that this is all, the state is also presuming that people will go back to work before February. So you serve the notice in October for September, or for September and October, and then they get a job again in November. They're back to work. So they should be able to catch up,
Right.
and they will only be responsible for the payments for the 2 months versus the payments through January. So
Right.
that's the reason why you can serve the notice every month,
Right.
and they must certify every month.
Right.
So that's
Denise-
how it's supposed to work.
Denise, let me run another scenario by you.
Mhm.
This tenant at the beginning of the pandemic lost a roommate that they couldn't replace at that time for health or for safety reasons, and they deferred 1/3 of their rent. So they've been paying 2/3 every month since then. Then the market crashed. And so now he continues to pay 2/3 of the rent. which is well above the 25% minimum. But he'll never be able to find a roommate now because market rate is much lower than his base rent. So at some point, we're going to negotiate a new lease and a price with him that's a little bit above the 2/3 he's paying now, but well below what his base rent is. So I am reluctant to serve a notice now because if we get aggressive, he could reduce his rent payment down to 25%, and we wouldn't be able to do anything with it. So
Yeah. But so,
we'll leave him alone.
and I completely appreciate that position, John. But sometimes I will say to a tenant, I am providing this notice not just for the benefit of my owner, but also for your understanding of what could happen. Because quite frankly, landlords change. And so you want to be in a position to provide the law to the tenant as well of, look, this is what a landlord can do, but I am willing to work with you, but I have to provide this as a backstop because the law requires me to maintain the highest and best value for my client. And so I must provide this notice pursuant to law to protect my owner and, quite frankly, to protect you, tenant, because owners do change. So I don't ever, you can soft pedal what your concern is, John, because I appreciate that. But at the same time, I still strongly suggest you serve the notice because it could be a significant amount of money. And if it is, then you're protected. And if it's not, then no harm, no foul.
But the other concern that I have in that circumstance is I don't see any reason to start renegotiating that lease at this time, especially that circumstance. I don't think, John, that's not a current lease. That's a month-to-month lease, right?
It's a month-to-month, yeah. And so
but we've got other situations with tenants who have current leases. And, I don't see any reason to go back and renegotiate with them. That tenant's on the hook, even though they signed a lease in June at a rent that probably we wouldn't be able to get today. I don't see any reason to go back and renegotiate their rent now in the middle of an active lease. Sometimes, everybody makes deals, right? And you make a deal, you stick to it. Now you want to talk about what next year is going to look like. We could talk about that, or we could wait till next year and see what happens next year. But we were having the conversation of this tenant could leave and pay the lease renewal fee or the lease break. It's kind of a lease break fee. They reimburse the owner a month's rent for the leasing commission that the owner paid us as the first cost of breaking that lease. And then they remain on the hook. I mean, we practically, it would be difficult to collect the remainder of a year's worth of rent. If the tenant leaves now and they've got 7 or 8 months worth of rent, we may not be able to collect it. We have the duty to continue showing and trying to rent that unit at a rent that is above market, but we're not going to find somebody, and that tenant is not going to be relieved of their responsibility to continue to pay the rent. So there's a business decision of, do you keep the tenant at a rent that's 20% lower, or do you try to hold the tenant to it and see if they stick around? And it's a difficult choice. We're going to have to figure it out in each individual circumstance and based on the owner's priorities.
But interestingly, that's an issue for the tenant as well.
Right.
I mean, the tenant has to figure out, wow, do I want to be on the hook for this long?
Right.
Or do I want to negotiate the lease in the future so that I do get some of my money back? It's a business decision for the tenant as well.
Correct.
Yeah. So I don't think that there's any harm if there is a term lease to negotiate it, but I also appreciate that if it's a month to month, then it's an issue regarding the negotiation. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the tenant's free at that point to leave with 30 days notice, and they can leave us with a basically uncollectible balance. I mean, we can try to reach them in small claims court for the remainder beyond their security deposit. But, if a tenant leaves and they have a balance on their ledger of deferred rent, I mean, we're clear to apply security deposits to that, correct?
Correct.
All right. So there's no.
And there's also no limit to small claims now for this particular issue for the AB 3088 non-payment of rent. If it's $20,000, you can still proceed to small claims.
Now, small claims limits have not been removed for other issues.
Correct.
Okay. So it's still $10,000 for everything else.
Correct. And there's only so many times the same owner can proceed in a year on the same debt.
On the same
Debt.
debt, the same individual debt. Well,
There's a
yes, I
limit.
mean, if you got, 15 tenants and you have multiple different issues with them, you can go, right, you can't, yeah.
So in other
means-
words, you can't go to small claims every month the tenant doesn't pay. There's a limit in a period of a 12-month period. Yeah.
Right, but you also can't break down a claim of $25,000 into 2.5, into three different cases, a 10, a 10, and a 5, and try it 3 different times for the same amount of money with the same tenant.
Correct. You may not do that.
Right. So, all right, well, that's interesting. Okay. Well, I'm happy to open it up if anybody else has specific questions about the process or about the way the laws have changed. I'm happy to discuss that. Another hopeful possibility of all of this has been that I have seen 1 or 2 people out there finding some assistance from nonprofit groups with past due balances, and they're bringing in offers to try to pay down unpaid rent from people who've been in a particularly difficult situation. We're having to deal with them and trying to train them on the fact that they're not getting a W-9 from the real management company because we're not the owner of the building, and here's how you get your paperwork done and all of that. But, otherwise, it's thankfully this month, we don't have any new deferral requests. Everybody's sort of making their way through it. We're pretty much at the same spot as we've been for the last few months. This isn't getting worse, but now it's starting to become an issue where the number of tenants that we're seeing who have asked for deferral are in a couple of different categories. People like hairdressers and personal services and in restaurants are going back to work a little bit, and they're finding themselves able to earn a living. Some people in particular in bars are finding that with the level of business that their employers are finding in the economy these days, even with outdoor dining and stuff, they're still able to make more money on unemployment than they would make being on payroll and earning tips. And so people are still on unemployment. And then there's the very unfortunate group of people who work in the hospitality industry, one of which is a tenant in one of our buildings who is a bartender at a downtown hotel. And there's just not going to be a lot of business for that group of people for the foreseeable future. And there's nothing any of us can do about it. Even with a lot of these hotels full of homeless people, they don't have a need for bartenders. They need someone to run and get them alcohol, but they don't have a need for bartenders. So that is, that's where we're at. It isn't getting any worse, but it isn't really getting any better. And I'm hopeful that, maybe after the election, people start to think a little bit differently, but it's going to be wintertime, and hopefully by the spring, things start to look up a little bit. John, we had a tenant that applied for one of our apartments that was moving here from North Carolina. Did you talk to them about why? I remember we talked about that.
I did, yes. So their company, they went, working remote when the pandemic started, and they had always wanted to live in San Francisco, and they thought, I can work remote anywhere, so I want to go where I want to be, and that's San Francisco. The rents are cheap. Let's go.
Well, they're not cheaper than North Carolina, but still, they're cheaper than they were.
They qualified, and that's the only applicant we've had say that. Usually the evidence is the other way.
That is an absolute sign of the times.
Yeah.
I mean, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
Someone coming out of North Carolina talking about cheap rent in San Francisco.
Right.
That's good. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it changes, in a sense that's good for the city. That's new energy. It's a change.
Well, we certainly need it, don't we? That's the lifeblood of our city, is people wanting to be here for whatever reason, for work, for entertainment, for everything, for culture. And I hope we still have it when this is all over. I mean, I would imagine we will. And the city will look dramatically different than what it's been, but I'm optimistic. Bert keeps sending me these wonderful articles about how cities haven't lost their mojo. It just looks a little different than it used to be. And the long-term outlook is good. And so I hope they're right. I want them to be right. I don't want to live in the boonies. I don't care how much outdoor space other people have. I like it in the city.
Did you listen to Scott Wiener's talk with the San Francisco Association?
No, I didn't.
It's recorded. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to the whole group. I mean, it's really interesting because he was all about this is temporary. This is temporary. You know, this is a shock to the system, but we are cities, and he's all about cities and density.
Right.
He's like, this is coming back. This is a pause button.
Yes. Yes.
So I'll send it to the group. He continues to be an interesting guy.
I think so. A good supporter of our industry and of good common sense legislation for the most part. And I'm glad that he came from San Francisco as opposed to some of our other supervisor board of supervisors alums who go on to cause trouble. So anyway. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Denise, for your help with this particular issue. John and I were talking about it this morning. I mean, this would make a great topic for October to talk about for our first call of the month, and we'll be back to talk to some of you about the strategy with these specific notices. And to those of you who we don't talk to about these, good for you. And thank you everybody for joining us. It's always good to see you, and we'll see you next week for another call. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.